Okay, can you guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. Hi everyone, hope you are doing well. Thank you for joining the webinar, How Do Offices Reopen and Operate After COVID-19, hosted by American Council of Engineering Companies, ACEC California chapter, and Structural Engineers Association of Northern California, SEAONC Business Forum Committee. I'm Daisy, the co-chair of the SEAONC Business Forum Committee. Before we get started, I would like to make a couple announcements for upcoming SEAONC events. Part 2 of the SEAONC webinar on the California Existing Building Code will be tomorrow, June 24th at noon. Attendees can register on the SEAONC website. Part 1 of the SEAONC webinar on FEMA P 2006, that is the example application guide for ASC 41, will be this Thursday, June 25th at noon. Attendees can register on the SEAONC website. All right. Today's webinar will be a 1-hour panel discussion followed by 30 minutes Q&A session. Please submit your questions to me. I'm gonna send a message to everyone so people know who I am and where to submit the question. Now I would like to turn it to today's panel moderator, Brad Dede. Brad is the Executive Director for ACEC California chapter.
Thanks, Daisy. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. Welcome, everybody. We appreciate your participating with us today for this very important discussion. This is the second time ACEC California has done hosted a webinar in conjunction with SEAONC, and we really appreciate the partnership. We think you're going to find great value in this discussion today. We did a similar presentation a couple of weeks back on job site safety in the wake of COVID-19, and now with this discussion about how do offices reopen and operate after COVID-19, I think it should be interesting. We've got a number of panelists here with us today. I'm going to ask each panelist to give a self-introduction, and then after that, we will roll into the questions. So with that, let me start with Guillermo. Guillermo, can you give us a self-introduction?
Yes, thank you, Brad. My name is Guillermo Tello. I'm a partner in the national law firm of Clark Hill. I'm based in the firm's Los Angeles office. I'm specifically a partner in the Labor and Employment Practice Group, and I currently chair the firm's COVID litigation task force. And so I'm here today hoping to impart some knowledge that we've accumulated over these last 3 months of the COVID-19 for the benefit of all of you in attendance.
Thank you, Guillermo. We really appreciate your time. Catherine, can you give an introduction?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Mraz. I'm an account executive and vice president at Dealey Renton and Associates, an Assured Partners company. I design employee benefit programs for architects and engineers. I'm also on the ACEC Life Health Trust Broker Advisory Council, and I manage the ACEC California Health Insurance Trust.
Excellent. Thanks, Catherine. Mike Olson, can you give us an introduction?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Mike Olson with Dealey Renton and Associates. Like Catherine, I'm a client executive and focus on working with design professionals, but I work specifically on what are called property and casualty insurances, which for most of the folks on the phone, professional liability and risk management, but really today we're going to focus on the other coverages like general liability and workers' compensation coverage, which we do for clients.
Thank you, Mike. And Jeff Brink, how about a self-introduction?
Sure, thanks, Brad. My name is Jeff Brink. I am the managing principal of DCI Engineers' San Francisco office and also a vice president with the firm. For those that don't know DCI, we are a structural engineering firm. We have about 13 offices throughout the western and southwestern United States. And so relevant to our discussion today, we have been dealing with, have a lot of experience with multiple offices and having different scenarios in each office in terms of how we're addressing. And I know we're going to get into that conversation later here. So looking forward to that.
Very good. Thank you, Jeff. Keith London, how about an intro?
So I'm Keith London. I'm the president and CEO of Kennedy Jinks Consultants, California-based company, 16 states, 26 offices, water, wastewater company. I also am on a vice chair on the executive committee for ACEC National. And thanks for having me, Brad.
Our pleasure. Thank you for your time, Keith. Last but not least, Jason Bravo.
Thanks, Brad. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jason Bravo. I'm a partner and principal at TLCD Architecture in Santa Rosa. I'm also the firm's CFO.
Very good. Thank you, Jason. We appreciate your being here. So without further ado, we're going to just jump into this because the way it worked before, I think we have a series of questions that we developed in advance of this, and I'm going to walk through these questions and pitch the questions to our panelists for our participants to listen to. Those of you participating in the webinar, if you have questions, you can submit those over in the chat, right, Daisy? That's where they should go, I imagine. And,
that's correct.
Okay, so submit your questions over in the chat, and then if I miss seeing it, Daisy's in the background, and she's going to be prompting me to make sure that I catch the question. Some of your questions may be answered in questions that are going to be coming down the pike, so we may just wait for your question until we get there. And we should be able to walk through all of our questions within an hour, and then we'll leave it open for another 30 minutes if you have further questions beyond that. So our intent is to be done by 1:30 for sure. So question number one talks a little bit about a company that has multiple offices in different locations, and how do offices and companies navigate through all of the local regulations and establish a policy with some consistency. And I'm going to toss this to Keith London first with Kennedy Jinks, and then I'll ask Jeff to jump in and see what your firm's doing also. So Keith.
All right, thanks, Brad. So like I said, Kennedy Jinks is 16 states, 26 offices. I would say that the answer to the question initially for us was none of it was clean, all of it was messy. We were receiving emails and communications from staff, text messages telling us that something had been shut down, something had not been shut down, no construction, yes construction. And we were fortunate that we have a pretty diversified geographic presence from a leadership standpoint. So our CFO is in a different state, our general counsel was in a different state, CEO, chief operating officers were all in different states. So we were able to get a lot of good information. But ultimately, what got us in the right place was we had an intranet set up where we could have, as this information came available, as ordinances got approved by the local or state health officials, we would post them, and then we created a COVID-19 response team consisting of 3 health and safety people and 1 general counsel that would go through this on a nightly basis, and we would publish updates on the KJ intranet so people knew what they were able to do and not able to do. The other thing we were able to do was for anyone to do anything other than be at home at the beginning of this, they had to get permission from the COVID-19 response team. So initially it was an email, later it ended up being an automated Microsoft Forms flow process, but initially it was an email. And then for you to be able to leave your home, you had to get permission from the COVID-19 response team who would review the local regulation. So it all sounds like we had it all figured out. We had none of this figured out. I remember working with general counsel who's in New York at 10:30 at night one night, just trying to get California figured out because that was the time that Governor Newsom implemented something very late. We had to respond by the next morning.
Yeah, not an easy process by any stretch of the imagination. Jeff, did you want to add, how's your company dealing with it?
Well, I think to what Keith pointed out, it has required a lot of flexibility and a lot of late nights. And partially because, as everybody knows, a lot of these directives or the information coming out from different jurisdictions happens very late in the game. They don't do a good job, even when they set a deadline for themselves, providing information to each to their constituents in a fashion that gives us as business owners and operators time to respond and figure out what our process is going to be. So it has required a lot of late night discussions to figure it out. Similar to what Keith said, we have set up weekly calls with our principal group, and then we also have a response team essentially that reviews all the data and information that's coming from the various jurisdictions where we have offices, and then provides our team information and recommendations in terms of how to proceed. The one thing I would say, I guess, that's been our philosophy is flexibility, and making sure, because we have offices in very different jurisdictions in terms of how the jurisdiction has interpreted the steps that they want to take, and how the procedures have been implemented in terms of what you're required to do. We've had to make sure that we're providing a lot of flexibility to each office to be able to implement things that are right for their office and their area, and to try to balance out, obviously providing safety to our staff and to our employees, but also allowing people to still continue to operate, because we want to be able to service our clients still. And if construction's going on, then obviously we have to help them facilitate that.
Very good. Very interesting. I'm going to keep moving along. I don't see any immediate questions on this particular further questions on this particular question, but I'm going to move on to our next question then. And it's a title question with about 5 more questions under it. I'm going to read what they all are so that the audience is aware of where we're going with this subject. And then I'll toss it to Mike Olson and Guillermo. And I think Guillermo, you'll answer first. But the question is as such: what happens if someone in the office gets COVID-19? And then I'm going to read where this goes with that. Is a firm liable to pay for testing and medical treatment for anyone that that person came in contact with? Does the firm have to get everyone tested? How does the firm notify the staff? What privacy rules apply? And should firms reevaluate their general liability policies to cover this possibility? So, Guillermo, if I may, can I toss that to you for the first part of that?
Certainly, and I'm actually glad that they broke it down, because what happens if someone in the office gets COVID-19 is a loaded question. And so it's important that it was broken down into subparts. So attacking the question, the subparts of the question, fortunately, in most jurisdictions, they're offering free COVID-19 testing. And so in terms of liability for testing and whether you have a responsibility to pay for that, the answer is generally going to be no, because most people are going to have access to free COVID-19 testing. But in terms of medical treatment, well, the only obligation to provide medical treatment would be if then one of those individuals that have been tested also tests positive for COVID-19. And with that, again, we have to look at the very specific jurisdictions. For example, under California, Governor Newsom has signed an executive order that gives a presumption at law that if someone tests positive for COVID-19 and they had performed work at your location at any point in time within 14 days of testing positive, there's a presumption that they became infected with the virus at work. Automatically creates liability. It is a rebuttable presumption. There are many things that you'd have to establish to rebut that presumption, but you have to treat it with the opening presumption that you're going to be on the hook for that if one of your employees catches it and tests positive, that it's going to be presumed to happen at work. And then with regards to what you do with everyone else, well, if you have one employee that tests positive for COVID-19, you should disclose to any coworker, any client or customer, or even vendors that may have come in contact with that employee within 14 days of the positive test. And you have to be careful, though, in the way that you communicate it, because you don't want to disclose the identity of the person that tested positive. You don't want to disclose any medical conditions, and that includes symptoms that they may have exhibited prior to testing positive. And so you really just want to inform those individuals that fall in that scope that someone that they work with or someone that they may have come in contact with at work tested positive, and that they themselves should get themselves tested to make sure that they have not caught the virus. And so that's really the balance between one, notification to people that are at risk now, and the privacy rules, because under California and federal law, employee identity and employee medical conditions are confidential and protected. And so an employer can't disclose that without seeking permission, which begs the question, do you want to seek the employee's permission to disclose their identity? You could, but you could potentially also open up Pandora's box. And so it's safer to simply provide the critical information to those that may have come in contact by letting them know that someone has tested positive.
Good, Guillermo, that's very helpful. Before I ask Mike to jump in, and Mike might know the answer to what I'm about to ask also, but regarding that workers' compensation liability, is there was there a deadline for that? Is there a time frame when that doesn't exist anymore, or has that been established?
Yes, so under the executive order, the presumption will cease to exist once the current pandemic orders are lifted. They haven't been lifted. We're in this phase process, right? And so until they've been lifted, that presumption remains.
Okay. Mike, concept of should firms reevaluate their general liability policies to cover this possibility? And if you want to respond to any of the other stuff also, Mike, that was just mentioned as well.
Certainly, thank you, Brad. And as we look at the workers' comp presumption order, I think the important thing to remember is that that was all protest, pre-Black Lives Matter, that was really the beginning in the middle of May, and that's really been a different X factor that the governor has not addressed at this time for people that have been back out of the home. So I think the original deadline was somewhere around the middle of July, but certainly a lot of that can change on the presumption piece. But Guillermo is spot on. Any employee that contacts the virus in the course of work, currently now and going forward, it's automatically going to be covered under the workers' comp policy, and that includes on the job site as well, inside and outside of the office. In terms of general liability, what general liability provides coverage for here is for people other than employees that may come onto the premises that contact the virus, vendors, people on the job site, if it was somebody else, they're all going to be covered under the firm's general liability policy. And how do you evaluate increasing limits? Because there could be an exposure point. That's certainly a possibility. I think firms can mitigate most of that risk by not having temp staff, vendors, clients come into the office. I know we were asked to go in and do an insurance renewal meeting next week. That's not going to happen. Our team is not going to go do that, but other folks might think about deferring that type of stuff for the immediate future and even longer than that to mitigate that risk of people coming on site because you carry the burden of that risk. If you were going to look at reevaluating your limits, you could look at increasing your umbrella. I don't see the in-office exposure point being as significant here. I think the job site is where the hornet's nest of litigation is going to exist in the immediate term on this particular piece, absent any type of national legislation, which has currently been presented. There's obviously, disputes on the national level between both sides of the aisle on which one is most appropriate. But if no legislation gets passed, there's going to be issues if there's a hotspot on a job site. Were there protocols enforced? Was it the firm's employee or another employee? All of this stuff where you read insurance provisions on additional insured language on general liability policies is all going to come into play because everybody's going to start tendering claims to one another in that environment. That would be the exposure point, I think, to consider if you did increasing your limits, and to do so, you look at it on your commercial umbrella policy.
Okay, very helpful, Mike. I'm going to keep rolling here with our questions in the interest of time. And again, if people have questions, don't hesitate to throw them up in the chat, and we will address them as well. So I'm going to pose this question to Catherine and Guillermo, and Catherine will ask that maybe you respond first, and then Guillermo. Yeah, so the question is, can a firm legally require everyone in the office to get tested before they're allowed to return to work?
Yes, so we definitely received this question from clients. I think when thinking about testing, the first thing to understand is that there are two types of tests. There is an antibody test and there is a live virus test. And there are many, many tests within each of those categories, none of which is 100% accurate. So we do want to think about that when considering testing. The Department of Labor was silent on the antibody test until mid-June. Mid-June, they stated that antibody tests are not allowed. So employers cannot require an antibody test for return to work. Live virus tests are allowed. I think as an employer, the thing to remember is that all it tells you is whether or not the virus is live on the date of that test. And then Guillermo, I think we'll have recommendations that if you are doing live virus tests, there's some things to consider.
Okay, well, let's kick that over to Guillermo now, the attorney on the line too. Thank you, Catherine.
Sure, no, and that's exactly right. So the DLL has specifically said, and you cannot require antibody testing of your employees. With regards to the virus, as Catherine was saying, you have to really consider the utility of requiring that test and some of the employment aspects of that. One, if you require that test, again, the utility is on the date of the test and at the time that the test was returned, that person was not carrying the live virus. That doesn't mean that on their way back into the office, they didn't get infected with COVID-19, that at the time that they met with a customer or they met with someone that they didn't interact and again, become infected with the virus. So the utility of it is minimal when you can consider the possibility that in California, we're beginning to see on the employee plaintiff attorney side, some theories being thrown out that if you require an employee to take a virus test and they have to go to an offsite center to do that, that all of that is compensable work time. And so you have to factor that in and the cost of that for the value that you're really getting. And so what we're seeing more in terms of testing is we're seeing employers implement on-site health screens, body temperature tests. We're seeing self-reporting questionnaires being asked, and a very flexible policy that would allow someone that may be exhibiting any of the CDC published symptoms for COVID-19 to return home and continue working remotely as they may have been doing prior to reopening the office. And so I think that is the recommendation where most employers are moving towards, is the on-site, at the time, temperature screens and self-reporting health questionnaires. That's been what's proven most effective, as opposed to actually requiring a full virus test that, again, the utility of it is very minimal.
Okay. Very helpful, Guillermo. Let's stick with you, Guillermo, too, for the next question. Switching gears just a little bit, but is the company responsible for providing masks and PPE, personal protective equipment, to everyone?
So again, there's an interesting interplay here. Under the OSHA guidelines, masks and face coverings are not considered PPE. That said, it is a requirement. It is they are part of the CDC guidelines. And then you have to look at your specific jurisdictions, and you look at a jurisdiction like California, where Governor Newsom has basically required the use of masks in all public places, which creates a question of whether your place of employment, where you have multiple individuals coming into work, is considered for that purpose a public place. And so with regards to that, the recommendation is that in following the CDC guidelines and in following some of the more specific guidelines that Cal OSHA has published for specific industries, including the construction industries, that employers should provide PPE, gloves, masks, things of that nature. You should make it available to your employees. If your employees desire to use their own, that's fine, and you don't have to reimburse them so long as you do have that equipment available for them at the job. But if you're going to instead require that they bring their own PPE, then under California law, you may have to consider reimbursing for the cost of that PPE that the employees had to acquire.
Okay, good comprehensive response. Thank you, Guillermo. Again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to throw them up in the chat. Any of the other panelists, if you want to piggyback on anything that's been said, just butt in, and that's okay. I'm going to move on to this next question then, asking, and I'm going to stick with you, Guillermo, for the first part, and then we'll have Catherine piggyback after you. Should firms have a COVID-19 policy? And if so, what should be in it?
And it's more, the answer is more, there should be COVID-19 policies, plural. There's not one specific policy that a firm should have. And so you want to have policies in place that address a number of topics, from obviously having an infectious disease prevention and response plan. You want to make sure that you have a basic infection prevention measures policy. You want to have a policy for the prompt identification and isolation of employees that may become infected with the virus. You want to work your remote work policy into that response and isolation policy. So you want to make sure that they're consistent. And if you traditionally had a remote work policy, or if you instituted one during the shutdown period, and now as you are reopening, you want to make sure you take a close look at that policy and you integrate it with some of your prevention policies to make sure that it allows the flexibility for employees to continue to be productive. You want to make sure that you revise your travel policies again, and you want to look at specific guidelines at the national and state local levels regarding policy. And you also want to make sure that you've taken the opportunity, if you haven't done so, to revise your leave policies, including your sick leave policy. And so those are all the types of policies that we need to consider when we're talking about having a COVID-19 policy. And in terms of what needs to be in each one of them, it's really something that you need to discuss with your individual counsel, whether that's your general counsel in-house or your outside counsel, because you want to factor in things that are unique to the way you operate, things that are unique to your culture, the way you do things, and there is some room for preferences in how you are going to handle certain situations. So you want to make sure you have that very specific. I would not recommend someone pulling a generic policy of an internet site and rolling with that. It's probably going to miss some very key issues that are specific to your firm's operations.
Very helpful, Guillermo. Catherine, did you want to piggyback on that? Was there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I think the only thing that I would add, and Guillermo and I had talked about this previously, is there is a Cal OSHA general guide that can be used as a resource. And also they've done some guides by industry, including a construction guide. Also very important though to look at the municipal level. And if you are in the city of Los Angeles or San Francisco, for example, are there any other additional requirements locally that should be incorporated into your guides?
And one other thing I'll add, Brad, is, and I know, we're talking a lot about California and Cal OSHA, and they've published guidelines specific to the construction industry and other industries. You also want to look at the OSHA national level guidelines. They, in addition to having similar industry specific guidelines, they have also published 28 OSHA approved state plans. So 28 different states have sought approval from OSHA for their individual state plans, and those are also published. So there's a lot of guidance out there that everyone should be seeking before or during the time that they're thinking about revising their policies.
Okay, very good. I see a couple of questions rolling in that Daisy's been putting up that I'm looking at as they relate to some things we just talked to. I see another question that I think we can get to later on in our discussion, but there's one question here. Someone's asking if they'd like some clarification on the workers' compensation question. So Guillermo and Mike, this person is saying that their understanding is that the presumption is going to be lifted on July 6th. And so the question is that no longer the case? Do either of you know for sure about that?
So that was the initial intended date for the expiration of it. And I was seeing if I can pull up the latest update on that. But it's quite possible, and we are internally hearing that it may get extended, and it's likely going to be extended simply because we're beginning to see an uptick in COVID cases again, now that things have started to reopen. And before Governor Newsom instituted the everyone wear face masks order. So that is something that we are tracking very closely at my firm. And as soon as we have more information, that we'll definitely share it with these organizations.
Awesome, thank you.
And it's not a coverage issue, Brad. The workers' comp policy is going to trigger, and it's going to provide coverage for the employee no matter what happens. It's just a matter of, originally one of the rebuttal points we had was combating fraud, where an employee was, out there going to the beach while they were working from home. They went into the office one day and you had this thing. The workers' comp system has been pretty adamant by coming out that they feel that they're going to be able to adequately handle the claims. They don't think it's going to be a significant stressor on the system in terms of aggregate claims payouts. And so I wouldn't necessarily be significantly concerned with the workers' comp on the presumption order basis. I think it's more of a matter of assessing the plans when people coming in, that you're doing the other things that Catherine and Guillermo are talking about, and Jeff and Jason, about being pragmatic with these safety plans to protect your employees in the office, and looking at the comp policy as the safety net at the end of the day. If somebody contracts the virus on the job, they report a claim, you're prudent about making sure you report it to the workers' comp insurance carrier, letting them handle the claim, and then doing everything else in terms of Guillermo talking about notifying other parties. So don't get hung up on the presumption order, I guess is what we're trying to say.
Okay, good. Now there's another question here. I'm not sure we're going to, somebody's asking, and let me just say that this is being recorded. So if anybody misses anything out of the conversation, know that I know that ACEC is going to post this on our website. I'm assuming SEAONC will make it available as well. But there's a vague question saying, what was the second policy type that Guillermo mentioned? Does that ring a bell to you, Guillermo, about a second?
Yeah, so fortunately I have a few notes up here.
Okay,
so
good.
The first two, just in case they were heard backwards or I said them backwards, the first two I listed were the infectious disease preparedness and response plan and a basic infection prevention measures policy.
Okay, very good, thank you. I'm going to keep rolling here now with some questions. And Catherine, this will be up your alley. Should firms reevaluate their medical insurance policies to see how COVID-19 would be covered? That's your bailiwick, Catherine.
Yes, thank you. So if you have a fully insured health insurance plan, you do not need to evaluate it to determine how COVID-19 will be covered. The insurers were very quick to communicate that testing for COVID-19 is covered at 100%. It typically needs to be ordered by a contracted provider and, ideally use a contracted lab, but even out of network, they're covering at 100% in some circumstances. So there is no need to reevaluate your medical plan if you're fully insured. If you are self-funded, and there's different levels of self-funding, to some extent you are writing the plan provisions and you are determining how you cover those claims. So if you are self-funded to any extent, including a health reimbursement arrangement, where you're maybe reimbursing part of the deductible and perhaps using a third-party administrator to do that, you will want to evaluate your medical plan and determine, ideally, make sure that those COVID-19 codes are then covered at 100%. So,
Very good. Very good. I'm going to, unless anybody has anything to add to that, I'm going to move on to the next question. That was succinct and to the point. Next question is going to be for Mike and Guillermo again here. And then we're going to get into some questions for the principals from the firms. But back to this concept of workers' compensation somewhat, it's, the question is, how do workers' compensation rules and ADA accessibility requirements apply to employees who are being required to work from home? And are they different if employees are required to telecommute instead of asking to do this on their own? Like for instance, when telecommuting is a requirement instead of a benefit. So I'm going to start with Mike, and then we'll go to Guillermo. Mike?
Thanks, Brad. The workers' comp policy does not care if the employee is telecommuting or they're in the office. It provides the same level of coverage in either environment. Certainly from a telecommuting standpoint, there are exposure points from the employer because they don't have the ability to necessarily control the situation at home. Did they break their thumb on their couch watching TV and all of a sudden, you're being told that it's a claim you're running through the comp policy. So employers need to be mindful of doing check-ins from an ergonomics perspective and also considering work from home agreements with the employee where they're committing themselves to a dedicated space in the home where it's just solely for work and not necessarily on the kitchen bar or the kitchen table. Those might be additional considerations, but I'll put it over to Guillermo for the ADA piece.
Go ahead, Guillermo.
Yeah, and similarly, under the ADA or state local equivalent, the FEHA, Fair Housing Employment Act, it also does not care whether the employee is working at a employer-provided site or whether they're teleworking, remote working. If there are accommodations that an employee requires or may need in order to perform the work that they're being asked to perform, then those accommodations need to be considered and determine whether or not they can be provided or what other alternatives may exist. And so that can run from anything that is an ergonomic accommodation to technology, right? And being able to provide the technology that's necessary to perform the work. So you want to make sure that you are engaging in those, you continue to engage in those discussions with any employee that may signal to you that they either have a condition or some limitation that is inhibiting their ability to fully perform their job duties. So the short answer is you have to treat them the same whether you're requiring them to work remotely or whether you're allowing them as a benefit of their position or job to work from home.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you, Guillermo. We're going to move on now to another question here, and we'll direct this question to a couple of the principals from firms, and I'll start with Jason, and then Keith can respond to this as well. But The question, Jason, is how can a firm enforce social distancing in their offices, especially if their office uses open cubicles or desks instead of walled offices?
All right.
Jason?
Thanks, Brad. First off, with our firm, we are in an open office environment, so it's a challenging situation. And the first thing we've done is the obvious thing, and that is to work from home. And currently, we have everybody working from home, and we anticipate doing that for some time. However, we've been spending quite a bit of effort getting ready to have people come back to the office. And some of the things that we're looking at is, number one, communication, just making sure that we're communicating to our staff, that they're understanding what expectations are and the importance, and that the leadership of the firm is making this an important matter. And it's not something that we can just, not pay attention to. And so we are developing different policies, which we're then communicating to our staff to clearly identify what our expectations are. We're also using signage in our office, some simple signage as far as reminding people to use hand sanitizers to keep distance. We're putting maximum occupancies on some of our conference rooms. And we're even going so far as to do markings on the floor to identify where people can sit within the conference room, making sure that we're maintaining certain distances. Our office happens to have a fairly narrow common kitchen area, and so we're restricting the use of one person at a time. And that's being done through floor markings as well as signage, and also that communication that I mentioned. We are also evaluating the use of some temporary barriers. We have open kind of cubicles, workbench scenario, and so we're close to being 6 feet apart, but not exactly. So we are looking at deploying some temporary barriers, whether that be plexiglass or some other material. And also discussing with staff to keep that safe distance. We are also looking at utilizing partial reoccupying of the office and looking at options of having certain people come in, a couple days a week and other people coming the other days of week to see if that might be a potential solution. So there's a wide variety of things that we're looking at. It's also that self-assessment for people entering the office, and including things on there about social distancing and helping maintain that. The hope is that we don't have to be police officers to keep people away from each other. However, if the partners of the firm are walking the walk and talking the talk, we're hoping that will be an effective way to communicate that.
Mm-hmm. Very helpful, Jason. Keith, did you want to add steps that your firm are taking?
Well, the only thing I would add, and we're, Jason covered most of the topics that Kennedy Jenks is doing. The one thing that we are doing, as I said in kind of the first question, is every person that wants to go in the office has to receive approval. Now we have an automated where they will have to apply for entry back in, and using a Microsoft Forms flow process, it will tell every employee that wants to go back in the office who else will be in the office. And so you are required to do that. You're required to sign off. You're required to understand and read all of the requirements, both the local, state requirements, the company's requirements. And if they look at the list of people that are going to be in the office and they have to sign off on this and do not believe they can social distance, then they are required to contact the COVID-19 response team and say, I'm stopping, I need to get permission to do this. Now we're fortunate that we've been 100% safer at home policy, and we'll have, out of 400 people, we'll have half a dozen to a dozen people show up in our independent offices. So it really hasn't been a problem, but that's been the way we've been managing it so far. Kind of giving people the ability to make good decisions, but make sure that they are at least acknowledging what those decisions and criteria are.
Mm-hmm. Very helpful. Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Let's move on to the next question then. And this has to do with transportation. If employees need to take public transportation, and I'm gonna pitch this one to Jeff first and then Guillermo. But What if an employee needs to take public transportation to get to their office? If employees are reluctant to take transportation or transportation options are not available to them, what can firms do to help mitigate those concerns? Jeff, you want to say a few words and we'll give it to Guillermo also?
Sure. Yeah, this is an interesting question because it goes back to the first item we talked about, and that's being flexible, given having multiple offices, multiple locations with different parameters. Transportation is not an issue for some of our offices because the idea of public transportation in, for instance, in our Montana office is a doesn't ever come up. No idea what that means. Whereas in, say, our San Francisco office, we have everybody pretty much takes public transportation to work, and so we've had a number of discussions with folks about how that is going to work. And it's honestly one of the biggest concerns that people have about potentially coming back into the office is getting on public transportation and how do they get there. One of the things that we've offered, number one, obviously providing the flexibility right now that nobody's required to be in the office. And even after we can start returning to the office, we're still not going to be necessitating that anybody come in. It's based on this point on their perceived safety and what they think they need to do to protect themselves. But anybody who does want to come in and has a big concern about public transportation, at this point, we've offered to provide some flexibility in terms of if they have a car and are able to drive in, providing parking for them. We're anticipating that right now, probably the parking garages in San Francisco are not all that crowded, and finding a parking spot would not be that much of an issue. So we're trying to, again, provide as much flexibility and accommodate the changed work environment and the changed commuting environment also that everybody's going to be dealing with by providing benefits to people to help them facilitate that.
Okay, very helpful. Guillermo, did you have anything to add about how to deal with transportation?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add, and I think what Jeff, the comments Jeff made are spot on in terms of the way most employers are responding to it and the flexibility that they're showing and how they're trying to work around it. From a legal perspective, traditionally commute to and from work is not the responsibility of the employer, which I get is different from trying to keep a good work culture and trying to keep good and positive employee morale. But traditionally, you don't have that responsibility. And so if you had a critical employee or set of employees that you absolutely needed to have returned back to the office, then the question of why they can't come in work using public transportation really becomes one that would be typical to an accommodation discussion. And so if fear alone is their only response, it's not good enough under the law. Fear of being infected by COVID-19 is not good enough. But if they themselves are in a high-risk group, or if they have family members that they live with that are in a high-risk group, right, then we get ourselves into a conversation of what accommodation can we offer that employee to get them into the office. And it may be that, again, you pay for parking or you give them a transportation stipend to help pay for gas and things like that if they're going to be driving into the office. So that's the only thing that I'll add in terms of the legal perspective.
Very helpful. Thank you, Guillermo.
Brad, this is Mike. I wanted to throw one more thing in there that,
Yeah, Mike.
in the traditional concept, what Guillermo was talking about is the coming and going rules, is that, the workers' comp policy and the employer would not be on the hook while they're in the regular commute. During the governor's presumption order, that changes. So if they were to get sick by virtue of the fact that they were on public transit right now in the state of California, the workers' comp policy would trigger and it would be in play for that particular contraction of COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. Thanks for that, Mike. I'm going to jump down to our next question. We've got it's about 10 to 1 right now, so we've got about about 4 or 5 more questions that I want to get through, and then we'll open it up to general questions to everybody. So this next question deals with work culture, and we're going to ask the principals from our firms answer this. I'll start with Jason, and then we'll go to Keith, and then to Jeff. But question is, how can firms establish a positive work culture and maintain morale when people are working remotely? Jason, you want to start?
Sure, Brad. So for us, we have a long history and culture at our firm that we have worked very hard to develop over the years. And so we're committed to try to keep that going during this shelter in place. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're not changing our routines. An example of that is we have a long-standing tradition of every Wednesday afternoon, our firm gathers and we have a glass of wine or a beverage, and we have a presentation or some type of social event. This is every week. And so we've been continuing to do that virtually and doing that on Zoom. And we have a big emphasis really encouraging people to have their cameras on so we can all see each other. And we've had different people in the office give different presentations, and just that participation of seeing someone, hearing their voice has been invaluable. We also have our regular studio meetings. We're broken up into 3 different studios, and we have weekly studio meetings, and we're also doing that on Zoom. And instead of just doing the business of going through our projects, we take an opportunity for people to interact and talk and discuss kind of what their thoughts are, what they're going through, and just trying to bring that personal connection into the mix, during those sessions. I think that's been kind of maintaining that personal connection has been really important.
Mm-hmm. Very helpful, Jason. Keith, do you want to add anything about how your firm's doing it? And then we'll ask Jeff the same.
Yeah, 2 things that might be of some interest. One is back about 3 weeks ago, we held a virtual relay. 133 of our staff got together and basically created 11 teams, and people handed batons, and you could walk, you could play tennis, whatever was allowed by your local jurisdiction. And at the end, we ended up donating, like, I don't know, $2,000. That was $10 a person to a local charity for Feeding America. That really got a great buzz inside the organization. The other thing I thought was very interesting is when we've done 2 pulse surveys. One of the pulse surveys came back and said that culture has improved for those offices or individuals that are not connected to a major office. They felt more connected since this occurred than they did before. So they no longer, in their minds, were no longer the isolated individual in a 2-person office. They felt like that they were in parity with the major offices. And I thought that was a really cool benefit. If there's any benefit, and there is not very many of them, if there's a benefit, that was one we saw.
Yeah, that's interesting. How about you, Jeff? Any concepts?
Yeah, a lot of the same stuff that Jason and Keith talked about. And interesting statistics there, Keith. I had not heard about that study yet, but similar stuff in terms of happy hours, weekly happy hours. We're doing a weekly scavenger hunt. Everybody has to go out and find different items that we can think of and then share those on Microsoft Teams, and we get points out for whoever's, come up with the most creative ideas. So creating a lot of engagement and reasons and opportunities for engagement. I think the other thing about the legal side of commuting and whether the company is responsible for that. And really, when it comes down to it, keeping morale up is really about maybe stepping beyond some of the things we may have done in the past and reinforcing for staff that, we are a team and you're more than just an employee to us. You're part of our family, and we're going to go above and beyond the basics here to make sure that you feel supported. I mean, all of our staff are in the same situation as us. They're dealing with very unusual times and a lot of stresses in their lives, and knowing that they've got extra support from their company or whoever else it is goes a long ways in terms of establishing and keeping that morale going.
Yeah, this next question I'm going to keep with you 3 principles for this next question too, and I think it ties to what Keith just said a minute ago also. The question is, many firms are sending out surveys to their employees to see how they feel about returning to the office. What are your thoughts on that, and what questions would be good to ask? And Keith, I'm going to start with you because you mentioned the Pulse survey, and then Jeff replied about that. That was an internal survey you did, right? Is that
right? So we've done 2 surveys. One was called Returning to the Office, and then the other one was called Working from Home. I'm happy to share with anyone the list of questions. It wasn't rocket science, but it was very interesting. And one of the things that we took from this, so this is really about what are your needs going back to the office so we could prepare a process to help people. The other one was, wow, we're really getting feedback that people really enjoy working from home compared to the way it was before. So we had one specific question. After COVID-19, after a vaccine, how would you prefer to work relative to KJ office? Majority of the respondents said, I will be going into the office less after this is over than I was before. And so it's driving a lot of conversations in our company. In fact, we're getting ready to renew a lease in Sacramento, and we're going to refer to it as a collaboration center. So people will not have dedicated cubicles, dedicated offices. They will have the ability to work Monday and Tuesdays from home, and Wednesday and Thursday, Friday in the office, or some comparison, some mutually agreeable mixture. But if anybody would like to see copies of the questions that we asked, I'd be happy to share that information.
Okay, that'd be great, Keith. Maybe just send them over. You could either email them to Daisy, maybe just email them to Daisy and me, and then Daisy can post it for SEAONC, and we can post it for ACEC also. That'd be great.
Happy to do it.
Appreciate that. I'm going to ask the others to also. Jason, how about you on this concept of surveys?
So we have sent a survey out to our staff, and our survey was extremely simple. We included some information of some of the safety measures we're taking in our office, just so that they would have a little bit of information of what they were responding to. But we basically asked them, would they feel comfortable returning to the office, just to get a pulse of, how many people might be interested. We also asked them for their ideas and suggestions or concerns. So it was kind of an open forum for them to respond with any of their concerns. And the thought was to really kind of engage them as a participant and give them a voice. And I think that was, in our experience, the most valuable piece.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Jeff, did you want to add anything to that?
Just really quickly, absolutely agree with Keith and Jason in particular. The surveys that we've sent out, it's really about engaging them and finding out, what their concerns are or what their needs are. Sometimes the surveys are just related to what do you need in your work from home environment that you don't currently have. But it goes back to, again, just making sure that the team feels like they're engaged and part of a bigger collaborative effort to be successful. And that goes back to the morale discussion that we had before too. It's keeping everybody part of the team.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm going to, this one relates, I think, to some of the stuff that you were all talking about just a minute ago, but just in case there's anything more to add, and it's a question about productivity. And I think, judging by what some of you said, I think this question may have already been answered, but has productivity changed once everyone was working remotely? Has it gotten better, worse, or stayed the same? And then how might you be measuring productivity? So let me just throw that out to, again, why don't we just stick with you, Jeff, to piggyback on that first, and then we'll go to the other principles also. Jeff?
Yeah, this is a really interesting and complex question, both. And we've been looking at productivity both in terms of how our staff feels, and in some of those surveys, asking them how productive they feel, and also obviously looking at financials and our work hours worked versus billable rates and things like that. And it's interesting, our staff, I think, across the board feels that they're being more productive. And there's certainly no argument to the fact that without a commute and without spending a lot of time going back to the office and a lot of those things, there's an opportunity to save a lot of time during your day. And to some extent, I think a lot of our staff is engaging more, making an extra effort to communicate and share ideas and talk about projects. But to some extent, I think that may also require more time. It takes more time to set up a call and have a conversation than to lean over to somebody in an office and say, hey, what do I do about this? Or what do you think about this issue? Mm-hmm. So if we look at our productivity rates that we track, versus in our different software, we have seen a drop off in productivity, if you believe those numbers and what we're pulling out of the computers. So it'll be interesting. I think we need a longer case history in order to really evaluate that and confirm what we're seeing. But based on what we've seen over the last 3 months, we are seeing a drop off in the production rate.
Interesting. Okay. Jason, did you want to respond, and then we'll go to Keith?
Sure. I agree with everything that Jeff said. It's a hard thing to really pinpoint. If you look at just some of the metrics of billable hours, we've been maintaining all with a slight decrease over the last 3 months. It's still been relatively efficient. I think the unknown for us is over time, given the nature of our work and how we normally work together, are we going to suffer any issues of quality? And some of that is a subjective design quality, but it's also a technical quality as far as our drawings and how complete and accurate they are. And some of that we may not know until we get into construction. Because normally we're working side by side, looking over each other's shoulders, overhearing a phone conversation and then knowing when to, poke your head into a project to check it out. And that's the piece that I think we're missing right now.
Okay. Keith, did you want to add anything?
So I agree with everything that Jason and Jeff said. We benefited from about a 2-point pickup, just getting pure numbers, utilization pickup immediately after everybody was put into their homes. And what I've been waiting for is job overruns to kick in, and they have not. And so we're monitoring this closely. What we're seeing is fatigue. So we're seeing project fatigue going on, that people are just tired of being at home because they missed working in collaboration with their partners inside the organization. But we've actually, as of now, we've seen productivity increase over and hold reasonably steady since this all began. And it's gone to the bottom line. We're having a pretty good year as a result of it.
Okay. Good.
Brad,
Yeah, Catherine.
I'm sorry, just one quick comment on the subject of engagement and productivity. I just want to remind employers out there that this is an essential time to continue to promote your wellness programs. We know that lifestyle is a factor in claims down the road, things like eating, smoking, drinking, and working from home. It may be a little more easy to indulge. And so promoting your wellness program, Keith mentioned the relay activities, healthy eating, taking breaks, yoga, meditation, whatever your population will respond to, very essential right now at this time.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Let's move on to this. I've got like 3 more questions here, and then we're going to open it up to everybody. And I see a couple of questions in the chat. And this is for Keith and Jeff, I think. Do you expect your offices, well, and maybe you've already answered this actually. Actually, you know what? I'm going to skip this question. I think we already got to question 13 through much of your conversation already, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to pitch this question, I think, to Keith, because I think, Keith, you framed this question for us once in advance too. But thoughts about Families First Coronavirus Response Act and whether it helped your firm when employees were unable to work due to COVID-19.
So we had about half a dozen to a dozen people that needed to tap into FFCRA. And the main reason was because they had little ones at home, they had childcare challenges, and they were becoming exhausted. They were trying to work from the hours of 8 to 5, and they had challenges of being able to take care of young children, 1, 2, 3-year-olds. And what we were finding is they were running out of energy. They approached our HR department, and fortunately for us, FFCRA allowed the ability for them to be compensated for that time, and the company would be reimbursed through payroll taxes back to the federal government. And I thought that program worked out really well. We only used it for a few people, but it was really beneficial for a few people that did benefit. And I believe it's still running. So other organizations companies can utilize FFCRA.
Yeah, Brad, just on a technical level, FFCRA is for companies with 500 or fewer employees, and it provides a 40-hour sick time bank for full-time employees or their equivalent, and then another 400-hour work bank for employees who are at home taking care of kids. If you received your PPP funds, you want to be cautious not to double dip. So if you got the payroll protection, that's separate from FFCRA, and you want to stagger those programs. But definitely excellent source of income to keep employees employed when they're struggling with those categories.
Okay.
And Brad,
Good.
just to make sure people don't also miss this, for companies that have over 500 employees,
Mhm.
to look at the location where your employees are performing work. Los Angeles has an ordinance that applies specifically for similar to FFCRA that applies to employers with 500 or more, and they count your employees nationwide, not just the employees that are in Los Angeles. Bay Area cities also have similar ordinances now. So you need to make sure that you are following the locales that you are operating in, because even if you've got more than 500 employees, you may have a local ordinance that requires a similar treatment that FFCRA would require.
Okay. Very helpful. Thank you, Guillermo. One last question here before I jump into a couple from the audience is, how have you handled employees' increased expenses for working from home due to COVID-19? And why don't I start with Keith?
So we retroactively, when did we do it? At the end of May, we made a payment to every employee in the company, unless, and I got to get this right, if they were working more than 8 hours a week, they got a payment of $40 a month retroactive to mid-February. So everybody got $100 payment, and we're going to make another payment in June, and we're going to continue to make that payment. We'll probably start to slow it down as it relates to people that are getting paid per diem, or if they had joined the organization working from home anyway, we may modify that policy. But we've been paying $40 a month, and the goodwill that we received for doing that, we got goodwill for two things that we did. One was $40 a month because they weren't expecting it. The other one is we sent everyone a cloth mask, and it cost $9 a piece. But I'm telling you that it made a huge difference to our employees when they got a mask. Happened to be branded Kennedy Jenks, but that's beside the point. That got us goodwill. But so answer the question is, we've been doing $40 a month.
All right, very good. Let's see, Jeff, I think you had something to say about that, and Guillermo also. Jeff?
Yeah, similar to Keith, we've been making a monthly payment to staff to the idea to cover internet expenses. Obviously, they're using internet for their work now, which they probably weren't doing from home previously. So that's the goal behind that, and we are planning to continue doing that as long as we need to in terms of their work from home conditions. On a side but related note to that, it's a pretty minor expense when you look at the fact our overall travel expenses and things like that for our company are significantly down. So I suspect that's the same for everybody right now. So there's also a lot of savings associated with this in terms of the overall company.
Yeah, fair enough. Guillermo, you had a point you wanted to clarify in here too on this question.
That's correct. So specific to California, the Labor Code 2802 is a very broad code that requires employers to reimburse employees for any expense that may be deemed to be necessary for the performance of their job. Right now, if you have employees working remotely that you previously did not, they're probably using their home internet for work-related purposes. You have to reimburse them a reasonable amount for that expense. Cell phone usage, similar. You may have had a number of staff employees that were working in the office, didn't really need to respond or be available by cell phone after hours, and therefore now they do because they need to make calls during the work hours. They're entitled to a reimbursement for reasonable use of their cell phone plans. And you can go down the line, right? And you have to identify what are the tasks that are being performed by your employees now that they're working remotely, and what are they using in terms of technology, in terms of resources, in terms of office type equipment, and are they entitled to some reimbursement? So I'd encourage everybody to talk either with their in-house general counsel or their outside counsel to explore those in more detail.
Okay. I'm going to jump into the chat now. Some of these questions were asked. I think we've answered some of the questions that people put up, and it looks like in some cases maybe a couple of people got on late and might not have heard But let me just ferret through a few of these. I got about 4 or 5 up here that I see. And so it's kind of all over the map, but one question is for Southern California firms, when are they opening up their offices? Does anybody have a comment about that? Does anybody know? You heard anything?
So Brad, I can jump in on that. So under the governor's phase reopening plan, each individual county can either move slower or quicker if they meet certain criteria. And if you go on the California COVID response website, California has published all of the plans for the counties that have submitted plans for their reopening process. And so if you're wondering whether you're in a county, your offices are in a county where you are allowed to reopen and what are the guidelines, your starting point should be there. Go to that website, go to the California COVID-19 website, look for the county, look at what stage and phases of the reopening plan your county is in, and that's a good starting point.
Yep, that makes sense, Guillermo. Thank you. I want to also make note, it looks like we noticed a big jump in the number of participants in the last 20 minutes or so on this call. So I think some of the questions that are coming in may be from people who missed the first part of the session. I'm not going to go back and ask those questions, but I want to remind everybody who came on this call late, this is being recorded, and you can watch this recording later to get some of those questions answered that you'd asked. There's another question here. Someone's wanting Catherine to clarify something that she shared. A company under 500 employees in California has paid employees under the FFCRA. Are we eligible for PPP, or is that double dipping? Catherine, you mentioned that. Catherine, you're on mute. Daisy, can you unmute Catherine?
There I am. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yes, I can speak to that. So the FFCRA, Families First Coronavirus Act, was passed April 1st, and it sunsets at the end of 2020. In the middle of that, the CARES Act came online, and employers applied through their financial institution, usually their bank, for the payroll protection funds. I do not know to what extent the PPP is still available. Most of the firms that we worked with that received PPP funds under the CARES Act received them in May, early to mid-May. So my comment about double dipping was, remember that FFCRA is a tax credit on the federal 940 quarterly withholdings form, and the PPP is also loan forgiveness. So both are designed for payroll purposes. Your payroll vendor likely has given you different payroll codes to track these hours under, so that they don't, so that they're kept separate.
Okay. Thanks, Catherine. I think we might have addressed this, but let me just try it again. Working from home, can offices remove work from home as an option if the office is following all the social distancing protocols? And I think this might be a question for Guillermo. I think you talked a little bit about that before, but do you want to reiterate?
Sure. So yes, if you are following all of the guidelines, it's unlikely that at this stage you can remove all work from home, because with social distancing guidelines, you're probably not able to return 100% of your workforce into the office as usual. That said, you can begin to phase people back into the office and slowly remove the work from home option. Now, what you have to keep in mind is that you still have to potentially provided for accommodation reasons for people that are in a high risk group and or have family members that fall in that high risk group. It is very similar to having an employee that presents with a disability or with a family member that has a disability. And so you have to engage in that discussion before you determine whether you're going to continue to allow them to work from home or require them to come back to work.
Okay, very helpful, Guillermo. And this, I think, stays with you, Guillermo, too, and Mike, maybe. I think we already talked a little bit about this, but just to clarify, can companies make employees come into the office, and what does that mean from a liability standpoint?
And it's basically the same question, Brad.
Yeah.
You can make them return to work. You're going to have to do a balancing act between your needs of getting people back into the office and people's legitimate reasons for not returning to the office.
Okay.
Because that's where the liability may come in. You may also, if you open up too quickly, not only are you potentially creating liability with your own employees, but with third parties that may need to come into your office. So there's a lot of different considerations to take into mind.
Okay, very good. I've only got one more question here, and we already talked a little bit about this. We've got about 10 minutes left. I show 1:18, but this is just a question about, I think, how much, someone's wondering, how much should employers reimburse for internet expenses? I don't know if one of the principals from the firms wants to talk about that. Guillermo, I don't know if you know a line where they should spend or anything. I'll start with Guillermo, and then how about any of the principals who want to weigh in?
So there's no bright line in terms of what you should reimburse. The language is that it needs to be a reasonable amount to compensate them. So, things that you consider are, most cell phone plans probably run between $40 and $50 a month. Most internet plans run somewhere between $40 and $70 a month. They're not using the cell phone and their home internet exclusively for work. And so you need to factor that in and decide in consultation with, the principals internally, what is a reasonable amount, and set the amount on what you think it's fair to the employees.
Fair enough, Guillermo. Any of the principals want to weigh in on that or not?
Yeah, I would follow up on that was kind of the approach we took. Fortunately, we transitioned to Microsoft Teams early this year, so it was ideal timing in the sense that all of our communications now goes through our computers. So we already are providing cell phones for most of our employees, but in terms of direct communication, everything can be done through the computer at this point. And we kind of settled on $50 a month. As Guillermo pointed out, we were estimating that most staff is spending anywhere from $50 to up to $100 a month on their internet costs. And if half of their time is spent working, then that seemed to make sense. And when we put that out there to staff, we just suggested if there's concerns about it or they didn't think it was covering their costs, that we certainly wanted to talk about it.
Okay, very good.
Sure, I can also add too, Brad. We went through
Please.
the same process that Jeff went through, and we actually settled on $50 a month as well, thinking that kind of splitting the cell phone and internet costs. And the reaction we've gotten from staff is they're just very appreciative. They weren't expecting to receive it, and they're finding it to be very helpful.
That's great. Okay.
Brad, I guess I would say I've got two principals that are at 50 and KJ's at 40, so I better do something.
Uh-oh.
We're at 40 also.
Yeah, the number I've heard talking to a whole bunch of other firms ranged anywhere from $40 to $50. That's what I've heard.
Okay. Well, we have 9 more minutes left. I don't see any other questions coming through. So I'm going to pause for just a minute here to see if anybody wants to throw up another question in the chat for Daisy to send over to me. And then for the moment, then I'm just going to, while we're waiting to see if any other questions come in, let me just open it up to the panel and ask, are there any other concepts that we talked about today that, or maybe some thoughts that came up that we haven't discussed that you want to impart on the participants from any of the panelists?
Brad, I have one comment. It's something that we've been struggling with for a while, and it's communicating with our office of when we're going to return. And there's been a lot of uncertainty, and so we've been trying to give people, a month notice, saying at this point we're going to be staying away for a month, and then we reevaluate it and extend it again. Just curious if anybody is having similar thoughts or how that's being handled elsewhere.
Communicating to employees?
As far as when we are anticipating returning to the office.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And as I mentioned before, flexibility has been the big thing in our minds. We have some offices, like in Montana, that are already pretty much operational and back to full staff. And it was basically a conversation about what the jurisdictions were requesting and how the staff felt about their comfort level and in terms of going into the office. And again, everybody commutes by, car up there, so they've got their own personal transportation, and the staff and everybody was comfortable doing that and wanted to get back into the office. So we've just been trying to be as flexible as possible. The counter to that is obviously offices like San Francisco and LA, Seattle, where we are still working from home and communicating to staff that it'll probably be a while that we're doing that before we even open up the office as an option for people, just because of very different working environment and very different jurisdictions in terms of how they're addressing it.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. There is one question that came through. Have any of you viewed the Cal OES reoccupancy online course, and do you have any opinions on it? Anybody know of that? I guess not. Okay, no opinions then. One other question here, are any firms providing computers? Any of you guys doing that?
Yeah, all of our staff was, again, fortunately on laptops before this started, so it was a pretty easy to, we kind of just one day picked them all up and headed home and grabbed monitors too. Most people grabbed monitors and took their laptop with them. We've had a few people go back into the office to get their chair or some other stuff that they realized that they needed, but it's been, luckily technology's put us in a position where it's been a fairly easy transition.
Yeah. Again, someone's asking the question if any of the LA County firms have opened their offices yet. Any of you know of LA offices open? Go ahead.
We have an office in Pasadena, and we use the safer at home policy. So if people need to go in the office, if they want to work in the office, they can do it. We never officially closed our offices across the entire country. We were essential workers. Depending on which state you were in, we got notification that we were essential workers. Some of them we got directed by clients to don't stop working, keep working. And so we never shut our offices, but our Pasadena office kind of fits in that geographic territory of people are still going to the offices, but they have to do social distancing. They have to get approval.
Okay. Very good. That's helpful. I show 1:25 on the clock. I see no other, wait, here's one question. Let's see. How much or which of these changes you think are going to stay with us even if we find a vaccine today? Well, let me start with Keith. I think Keith actually said something to this already earlier. You want to say it one more time, Keith, and then give it to the other principals as well?
So there's a lot of studies coming out. If you may have read it, Twitter actually told all their staff there are no more offices. As employees, you will be working from home forever. That's a smart move. I think that what we do in our space, it requires a lot of conversation and collaboration working together, especially if you've got younger staff, more junior staff. Mentorship is really critical. But I would say this, I do believe that there is an opportunity for a number of people now that they've done this, and I've talked to a number of senior people that have said this, I no longer need to have the office with four walls, with a door, so I can sit in it on a daily basis. I am now comfortable working from home. That only occurred, and these are people that have been in their careers 30 and 35 years, that are willing and happy and asking the company, please don't make me a space, I'll work from home and I'll come in occasionally. So we literally are doing a pilot in Sacramento that's it's gonna have a few dedicated spaces and a few dedicated cubicles, but a lot of collaboration, huddle rooms, a large conference space, working spaces that have good technology. That's something we're gonna be trying out, and we'll wait and see how it turns out.
Okay. Jeff and
Yeah,
Jason, you want to add?
I think it's going to be interesting. We've had a lot of conversations about it, and I think there's a lot for us to learn still moving forward. There's no doubt this whole situation will create a complete paradigm shift in terms of how we work in the future. I do think, though, I think we've been doing really well with our experienced staff. They have the ability to go work from home and still be productive. The challenge is going to be onboarding, and we've onboarded a couple people already during this time and hired new staff, and the training of those people and making sure that folks feel, number one, comfortable asking questions, getting the information they need when there isn't somebody that's senior right next to them that they can lean over and ask a question to. It's more imposing on a new member of a staff to make a phone call or make a Teams call to somebody that they've never officially met, and they know that they're supposed to reach out to them, but it's not as comfortable when it's not somebody that's right there next to them. So I think there's that long-term training and development of new staff that's actually the more trying part of remote work. And I think there's the challenge of morale too. I think we've done a really good job of maintaining morale with staff that already knows each other and is comfortable setting up, happy hours and participating in things from a remote standpoint. I think it's harder to maintain that morale and make a company really feel like they're tied together as one unit when, especially we've got 20 or 30 people that we've brought on remotely and they've never all actually met each other on a daily basis or don't collaborate as much on a daily basis in person. So those are things that I think there's definitely a shift here. I think there's some interesting questions and long-term changes that we're going to have to evaluate and see how everything works out.
So we've got about a minute left, and then we're going to close this. Jeff, did you have? I mean, not Jeff. Jason, did you have any parting comments on this same concept for your firm?
Sure, I would agree with what Jeff just said, and I think the key for us moving forward is going to be around flexibility, in that people will be spending probably more time at home, but also coming to the office. So trying to figure out a configuration that supports that, I think, will be important for us.
Okay, very good. This brings us to I see no more questions in the chat, and we've gone a full 90 minutes here with, I'd like to extend a word of thanks to each of our panelists. I think you did a great job. We really appreciate your time being here. I also want to say thank you to all of the participants. There's no point in us doing this unless you all jump on to participate. And we had over 100 people on when we first started this. It looks like there's still about 94 people there. So thank you for everybody participating. Thank you to SEAONC for partnering with us, ACEC California, to put this on. And I would encourage you all to watch both ACEC California and SEAONC going forward for other forms of education in the future as well. So with that, Daisy, I'm going to turn it back over to you to close.
Sure. I would like to thank Brad for moderating this. Again, this is great. I would like also to thank the panelists for this great conversation. And also, thanks for all the participants. And also thanks for the ACEC California and SEAONC staff for supporting us. And this recording will be available on SEAONC website and also ACEC's website, along with some references. So, yep.
Very good. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Brad. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
Well done, Brad.
Thank you.